Welcome back everybody. In this week's video, I'm going to show you how to make this mug, and we're going to split it up into two parts. Part one is to throw and trim the cup, and part two will be making the handle in three different ways and getting it attached. So if that's something that you want to see, stick around and find out how we do it. So we're going to get this ball and we're going to throw it into a mug shape that looks like this. And in general, mug shapes can be anything that you want. I'm going to throw a relatively simple form so that you guys can see, and you can play around with this form and adjust it to how you want it to be. And the main emphasis is trying to get your handles formed and attached, and that will be a little later on in this video. But anyway, let's get our piece. And the clay weight is around 1.35 pounds, or about 615 grams. And if you ask me why such the weird weight, I just grabbed whatever amount of clay I had left over, and that's just what it was. I didn't really want to cut it off, so you can kind of see how big this makes and adjust accordingly. And so centering is still more or less the same. You get it stuck, you blend the edge, you do the cone up by squeezing the clay. And this clay is a little drier than I would like it to be, so you might see me kind of really push the clay to get it to what I want it to do. Hit the groove at the base to cone down. So push forward, really squeeze. And I want to throw this a little more like a puck, a little wider, and you'll see why in a second. And so if your piece, this is more or less center, but if your piece was like slightly off like that, and you don't want to have to go through the whole cone up and cone down process, what you could do instead is use the karate chop method. And we are basically doing micro cone ups and downs without changing our hand shape. So we get the karate chop with our left hand pushing, right hand compressing, and we're not pushing down yet, we're just pushing forward with our left. You can see my right hand's not even touching the clay. That cones it up a little bit, it makes it rise, and then I come back with my right hand to compress. And if it's still slightly off, you still see this slight wobble, do it again. Push forward, and then push down. If it's still slightly off, add a little more water in the sponge, push forward, and then push down. And then right there, I have a piece more or less centered without having to go through the whole cone up and down process. And now I want it a little wider like a puck, because as I compress down and I open it, I want it slightly wider than my actual base so that I can easily pull it inward. And that just is a little easier for me when I make mugs. So I'm going to go ahead and compress this middle, apply pressure, and I start digging my well. Add a little water, dig, and then now, because I'm creating slip, I can use that slip on the inside. I'm still having my sponge hand, my sponge in my right hand, just for extra lubrication. And then I don't really want to trim a bottom on this, or a true bottom, so I'm just going to go and keep this a little thicker than I'm normally throwing. So this one's going to be about 1/4 inch thick. And now I'm ready to open. So another way to open that you may have seen in my previous video, especially for those with long fingernails, is you actually wrap the sponge around your pointer finger, and then you can actually pull the clay outwards like that. So this is another cool method to try, especially if you have long fingernails. I'm left-handed, so I like wrapping it in my left hand. Pushing down at the very bottom, and then I start opening and pulling the clay towards me. Okay, as long as you're pulling nice and gradual, you're not increasing the pressure as you go, the clay should more or less stay centered. And then I can go back and compress the bottom if it's not level. And then I have a pretty flat floor. Now if you're right-handed, same thing. Just take the sponge, wrap it in your right hand, put it into place, and then just pull outwards. Now I do recommend using your left hand, even if you are right-handed, because this pulling method pairs really well with the pinch and pull as you open, and you may have seen it in other videos. But if you can use your left hand on the inside, it's a little easier to then scale this technique with other ones that link to it. So I'm going to open this a little more. So wrap it around and then really pull my left hand towards my body. And it's going to look more like a plate or a platter, a mini plate or mini platter, as I do this final opening and pull. And that's fine. Just trust the process and you'll see why in a second. Okay, so I'm just going to compress this outwards towards my 3 o'clock. So nice flat disc. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to compress it even more with my rib. Apply downwards pressure in the center, and just like trimming, I'm applying pressure and I'm moving the clay outwards to really compress that bottom, especially because I'm not planning to trim I want to make sure no cracks occur. And as I open it up, I'm opening it up roughly to the width I want my cup to be. Yeah, right there. And then, sorry, the focus is getting kind of weird. And then I take my sponge, and then I smooth this out. And then I'm going to adjust my body so that my midnight will be more here than straight on. All right, so the reason why I shifted my body is because I want to have you guys see my left hand, my pulling hand. And so when I'm ready to start pulling, the reason why I wanted it so wide is so I can easily get access to compressing the floor because I'm not planning to trim. And when I pinch and pull, I'm basically going to get my final shape without having to mess with this bottom anymore. And so I'm going to do a kind of hybrid. It's not the pinch and pull. This is the claw, I call it. So my middle finger is on the inside, pointer finger on the outside, both at the same height. My left thumb is right here to match the same height as my inside finger. And the sponge hand is going to be pushing in at the base to then push this and bump it up. And so the cool thing about this technique is it works with large amounts of clay as well. Not only small amounts like this, but upwards to 5, 6, 7 pounds. But anyway, these are the hands. I'm going to pinch and then move up, inward and upwards. But before I even start the movement, my sponge hand, my right hand, is just going to be pushing in, and you're going to see the clay start rising before I even start applying pressure with my left. So as I'm bumping it up, you can see that the clay is already rising. The only thing that I'm doing with my inside hand is my middle finger is just being a nice strong wall here. It's not giving into the pressure, and that is causing the clay to hit this finger and then start rising. So this is a great way to get a nice pull. And so I'm going to push in a little more to really get that base compressed. Now I'm going to start engaging with these 3 fingers to compress, and you'll see the clay start bumping up and rising pretty quickly. So here we go. I'm starting to compress with both fingers. I'm squeezing. Start seeing the clay rise. I'm not even lifting my hand yet. So let's get rid of that skirt a little more. So now I'm really going to compress, and here is now the pull. Squeezing, and this is the first pull. I'm going to stop a little before I get to... I could have easily pulled this more aggressively and got it higher, but I want to stop a little earlier because I want to do that same pull again. And if it was any taller, I wouldn't really be able to squeeze because the clay would be too tall. This would catch, and I wouldn't be able to squeeze at the bottom. So I stopped a little before. But let's say you got excited and you really pulled this clay wall up. So let's go ahead and pull this a little taller. And it's a little taller, but you still want to do that same technique. Now, if I were to try, my hand is too short. I can reach the bottom with my middle finger on the inside, but my thumb is still too high. So if I wanted to do this pull again, I could just do that same claw technique and kind of just push downwards a little bit. Or you can come back on this rim and do a compression. But any way you do it, as long as you bring the height down so you can easily reach, you can then do that pull the same way. And this pull is a very stable pull. So I'm going to go ahead and get my hands into position, compress and push in the bottom. I'm going to tilt my wrist outwards this time to really bump this clay wall out to get ready for the pull. And then we're going to go and work our way upwards. Okay, and then I'm trying to keep my clay walls not too thin, but also not too thick. I release the pressure pretty dramatically there because I don't want my clay walls to be too weak, and the thinner it is, the less heat it can retain. So the insulation is not as well. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this inward to collar to get this a little narrower. Okay. So this is another way to collar, so kind of pinch it and pull up to get this back into a nice clean cylinder. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and remove the slip so I can get my texture on. So I want a nice dry clay wall so that it's easier to texturize it with my fingers. And then before I do the texture, I want to remove the water on the inside just to see how it looks. And from opening it wide to then pulling up, you can see my inside is perfect. I don't need to do any adjustments. So the setup in the beginning, although it's a little longer, works well because now I don't really need to mess with the inside. Okay, but let's say we had to adjust the inside because it was not completely flat. You could use a wooden knife or any tool that's long enough to fit in there, because my hands, I don't want to mess with the clay wall. And you can use this just like trimming. You're applying downwards pressure, and then you're moving it outwards ever so slowly to remove any clay, bumps, texture that you don't want to see in there. And then the other thing, right here, I like that being curved in the mug because if you drink anything with powder, it tends to get stuck inside of the curve as you add your liquid. So if inside the corner, sorry, it gets stuck in the corner as you apply your liquid and it's hard to get it out. So if it's curved, the odds of it sticking are a little less. All right, let's get our texture and then let's do a final shape. So let's get our finger in there and start working our texture. If you are enjoying these ceramic videos, don't forget to like and subscribe. That way it helps to grow the channel and you'll be able to see these videos as they're released every week. All right, there we go. And it got a little wonky. So at this stage, if you wanted your mug to be a little asymmetric, you can leave it as is, but I want to maximize the width at the bottom. So I'm going to actually do some shaping. So I'm not going to really balloon this out. I'm not really going to touch the clay on the outside because I don't want to mess up my lines. So instead I'm just going to use my left hand. I'm going to be pushing it outwards like this to then expand the wall here. And then basically just keep that consistent all the way up. So my left finger is like this. This is where it's touching at the bottom. And you're going to start seeing it expand right here where my left or my outside finger is. So I'm just making it a little wider. And then I'm just bringing that width upwards to make it match. So just kind of adjusting all that extra wobbliness that the texture added. Kind of pushing out where I see that it's a little off. And then if it was a little too wide for my liking, I could come in, and if you don't have texture, this is perfectly fine. You could come in and then kind of push in the clay wall where it got too wide. And like I said, this is the more simple clay mug shape. You can do this however you want. I like a simple straight mug. Easier to clean in my opinion. And that's more or less done. It definitely softened my texture with my outside hand, which I don't mind. The rim is still pretty level. I will cut that a little bit. But before I do that, I want to see what the outside looks like, the true shape. So that's where my wooden knife comes into play again. And I'm going to take my wooden knife and I'm going to cut away the skirt to reveal the true bottom. And so I'm going to take my wooden knife, I'm going to have the angle right here face the direction of the rotation of the wheel. So the wheel's spinning this way. I want the angle to hit so it cuts through it. Now if I were to rotate it this way and cut, or the opposite way, there's going to be more drag hitting the tool, causing this to kind of pull away from me. So I'm going to hold it like a pencil, grip my hand with my other hand, so like this. And it's best to have dry hands. If it's really clayed up, you may want to not do this, at least for your first time. Set the angle that you want, have your tool hit the clay, and then just push down until you hit the board. Okay. And then to remove that skirt, you just take your needle, slide it underneath the ring until you see it in that groove you created. Slice and peel. And then lastly, take your wooden knife again. And just put it on the board to remove all the extra clay that's still stuck. Now this part's not necessary, but I just do it so it'll be easier to clean and wire. And that is more or less done. So I like that clean angle. It kind of has a nice contrast, that nice straight angle and smoothness contrast against the texture I added. And so the last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to cut the rim because actually it doesn't really feel like it's rising and falling. So I'm just going to get a chamois around the rim and then we're good to go for the mug. All right, I shifted my body. I got my chamois. Let's go ahead and round this rim, because whenever you put your lips on something, you want the rim to be nice and rounded so it's comfortable. You don't want it sharp. And the benefit of having a rounded rim is glaze will stick to it better too. All right, now that it's nice and rounded, we're going to let this dry out so that we can clean up the bottom, do some minimal trimming. We're going to get this guy trimmed now, and we popped it off earlier, and you can see that the bottom has this little piece that didn't get cut off completely. And I found the easiest way to remove this is if you have a scraper. This is, I believe, used for drywall, but you can get it at any hardware store. And you basically just gently scrape off that bit, trying to only get the excess that are on top. Apologies for the students outside, they're cheering, so just disregard that. And we're going to go ahead and just scrape the rest of this, and then I'll just kind of transition into the next part when it's done. So I shaved the bottom off. There is still a slight high spot, but when I trim this down, I can remove the rest of that. And now I'm ready to get this centered to the wheel head. Now normally, when I trim without wads, I use the water tension technique where I get a sponge, I wipe the rim with water, wipe the wheel head with water, put it on top, move it around to get it stuck, and then center. I found a more efficient way that gets it stuck and it releases actually a little easier. And so that technique is using a brush and you add water to the rim once you get it centered. So let's get this centered first, and let's do it by tap centering. So I spin the wheel, and oddly enough, it looks pretty centered already, but let's say it's not centered, it was slightly off. So for tap centering, I take my left hand, put it on top, and every time the pieces touches my right hand, I gently tap it into center. And then once I get the piece centered to my liking, then I can stop. So when you tap center, you want to make sure you center either based on the bottom or the rim. In this case, I'm centering it based on the rim, so I can trim the bottom to center. So I'm looking at the rim and getting that nice and centered. Now you may not be able to get it perfectly centered, so just get it close as possible. So that looks pretty good to me. Now let's get this stuck using the water tension technique, or the hybrid of it. So we got a brush with some water, and we are just adding water to the rim like this to get that part stuck. And you don't need to add too much, so this is my third time applying, and just kind of let it spread out. Apologies for the helicopter flying above us. And then I just give it a little tap. Wiggle is not shifting, so I spin the wheel and I tap to kind of distribute the pressure. And now when I wiggle, it's pretty stuck. So from here, I can go ahead and start my trimming process. And whenever I trim without wads, or I use the water tension technique, I trim a little pilot hole here so that I then can apply pressure with my finger in here, so my left hand, so that this doesn't pop off. So let's get this trimmed away. And we're going to change the angle of this a little bit. And because when I cut it off, I cut a little notch into here, I actually trimmed most of it away. There's a slight notch, so I got to make sure to trim that down in a way a little more than I normally would. And like I said when I was throwing this, I'm not trimming a true foot. I'm going to do a concave foot, similar to the teacups that I've made. And so I'm just going to create this angle that I like. I could round it out if I want, but I want a nice sharp angle where it's smooth to contrast against the texture here. And the bottom, I'm just going to make a little concave, a little crater. So I'm going to trim that down. But I've been playing around with these new trimming tools that are very sharp by Bushcraft Tools. So I'm going to go ahead and use this to trim the angle. And it's really cool to see these just little shavings come off that are like paper thin. So it's really cool to see these tools in action. And I talked about this a little in my other video. They do get a little, they do have a slight learning curve because they can chatter or texture your piece if you hold it at a certain angle or if your piece is too dry. So just like with anything else in ceramics, just gotta make sure you practice and get used to the tool that you're using. Alright, I like that angle. Slight bump out. I'm gonna go a little more, so I'm actually gonna shave this down. There we go. And then kind of just taper it to make it match. Alright, that looks pretty good. And now let's go ahead and trim the inside. And like I said, I'm making it concave, so let's actually switch to the big one. So just a slight crater. And then let's check thickness. It's already starting to get a little thin because I did throw these a little thinner than I usually do. And as I get closer to the outside, I'm not trimming a true foot like I said. So I'm going to stop there, and then when I smooth it all out, I'm going to round that. But I got to remove, there's a slight high spot. You can see my finger kind of rising and falling. And that was from that little bump that was there before, the little piece of clay that didn't get wired off. And so to level it out, I'm going to spin the wheel really fast and kind of float my tool in hopes that you can hear it skipping. In hopes to only trim the high spots. Okay, let's try to get a sharper tool to do the rest. Covers more surface area. There we go. I think it's getting a little better. It's not skipping as much. I just gotta level this bottom or the middle. Okay, there's a little more. And as you can see, I'm using my left hand because I am left-handed. So if you can learn how to trim with both hands, it actually helps you out in the long run. All right, and then final bits. There we go, looks pretty good. And then let's go ahead and add water and smooth out the trimming. So a little bit of water. And my newly trimmed edge. And you can see I'm spinning this super fast and it's still really secure. So the water tension technique with the brush, as long as you're not applying a lot of heavy sideways pressure, you can keep your piece relatively stuck. So now this is more or less done, and I'm ready to pop it off. So normally in the past, I would take my hands and kind of wiggle until it released, but I was told that if you just slam your hands or fist against the wheel head, it should pop off nicely. Let's go ahead and try that and see if it works. Did you see that in the camera lifted up? Wow. That was amazing. And the rim is more or less undamaged. Now there is some trimming crumbs on the rim. You can kind of see it on the overhead cam a little bit here and here. But just a little bit of water to kind of smooth out and knock off those bigger pieces. And a little bit of smoothing with your finger. And this is good to go. Mahalo for watching this week's video. In next week's, we are going to get this handle made in 3 different ways, and we're going to get it attached. So if that's something that you would like to see, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can see that video when it's released. And I want to give a thank you to all of the Mud Club members. If you would like to become one, take a look at the description below, and it goes over all of the things that you receive. And one of the awesome perks of being the Mud Club member is a Google document that has all of the videos in a nice and organized location so that you can find exactly what you're looking for rather than scrolling past the multiple videos. I think I have over 70 so far. And thank you for watching, and until next week's video, see you later.